Hello, today's project is a quick and easy one. It's making some wood shelf decor to add a little holiday flavor to your house and to show off to your family and friends the great work that you created. Each of these 3 projects I'm going to go through should take under an hour a piece, not including all the drying time if you decide to add some more embellishments. But they're pretty quick and they're fun to do, and you can even get the kids involved.
For my tree, I kept it pretty simple. I was using a 1x6, so I made one that's 5.5 inches tall and then copied. I then created a 3.5 inch tall by 0.75 inch wide rectangle to slice out of the top and the bottom to make it so that the trees slide together. And I used 0.75 wide because using a 1x6, I knew that the depth of my board was 0.75 inches. I then centered and used the top and bottom align to make sure it comes out perfect. For my snow, I just found a font I liked and then a snowflake, and there we go. I also just found a reindeer I happen to like and a snowflake. And then to create my stencil, I made a square box a little bit bigger than my snowflake and just sliced again, so that way I had the cutout I need to create my stencil.
Now that our designs are created, we're going to go ahead and create our templates and cut out the vinyl for our reindeer. I just have some stencil vinyl and I had a little scrap I was able to use and put it on the green mat. It's stickier. And then I have some 12 by 18 paper I put on the blue mat, which is good for paper. This one's getting a little bit less sticky because I've had it for quite a while, so maybe it's time for a new one soon. You can clean them with baby wipes, but this one's been around for a while. I have my pen, and I always put the cap on top, so that way I don't accidentally lose it. And then I know for this first mat that we've got some light cardstock, and I'm going to do default pressure. So go ahead and load my mat. And go ahead and start. Through the magic of video editing, voila, our stuff is cut and drawn, because let's be honest, watching a Cricut work really isn't that exciting. So as a reminder for the stencil, you do the opposite for weeding of what you would normally do. So we get rid of what we want to keep to show through and leave what we don't want. So for here, I removed our snowflake and kept the rest. So that way when I go to paint that, it'll show the snowflake. Then for our cardstock, the easiest way to do this is to flip it over to remove. That way you don't get bending in your templates. I'll set that aside. And I used to not cut these out, but I started to add the square and cut them because I got tired, honestly, of having to trim for my templates, and it just makes life a lot easier. So now, as you can see, we have our cutout templates that we'll head out to the shop next to cut out our wood pieces. Now that we have our template, it is time to cut our base wood. As you can see, I have all of them, and one thing I forgot to say, a lot of times when I am getting them off the mats, I'll go ahead and write the lengths from what the Cricut says. So like I know this is 6.5 inches, 7 inches, 6.2, and 11.75 inch long. So that way it makes it a lot easier when it comes time to measure out and make my cuts. I have my tape measure, a pencil. Then don't forget safety, we have safety glasses, and then I have my earmuffs to help with hearing protection because the saw and the dust collector can get pretty loud.
As a reminder, make sure to keep your fingers far away from the blade and watch where your line is when you're making your cuts to make sure you get the right distance.
One thing to watch for is when you're cutting out your wood for these is to watch where the knots fall. I ended up not using a little bit of this, and I'll use it for something else because I try to use as much wood as possible, but I didn't like where this knot fell because it would have ended up falling right about either the W or right at the top corner of the S. So I ended up taking the next section of wood, which was more knot free and fit much better for my wood as far as not having any knots and bad spots. Next step is to get our templates that we drew out onto our pieces of wood. There's 2 different ways you could use this, or actually probably a few, but there's 2 I tend to use. I either use, this is removable contact paper or painter's tape. Today we will just use painter's tape because it's pretty quick and easy. So I'll show you one of these. I just put some pieces on. can see, I have my tape on my wood. And then next I use some spray adhesive. I tend to buy Loctite brand versus the other brand, which I believe is Gorilla Glue, because I've had a lot more nozzle clogging issues with Gorilla Glue. I'm not sure if it's a Gorilla Glue thing or a me thing, but regardless, I tend to have better luck with Loctite. So I'll shake it up. And then I have a piece of cardboard here because sometimes it'll get some overspray and you don't want it on all your work surfaces. So just slightly spray it. Sometimes you have to wait a second or so to let it get a little tacky. And then I will take that piece and put it on my wood, like so. And now we have a template. And the reason we use the tape or the contact paper or anything is because I don't want to get all that spray adhesive all over the surface of my wood. So when I go to take off my template, I just peel the tape off and I have a nice clean surface. Now I'll go ahead and do the rest of these off camera and then we'll begin cutting. Now it's time to get the fun part, to start cutting out our shapes. I have both a bandsaw and a scroll saw, and I use both regular. You could use both or either or for this project, either works. I will show an example of both. The first thing I'm going to cut is the grooves for our trees, because I like to do these first because I can leave the fence on. And then I know that it is 2 3/8 of an inch from the edge of my board to the first groove. And I'll do 2, and then I will shift it over the extra 3/4 of an inch to get the other grooves. Then that'll be done, and I have nice straight cuts.
First, we make all of our grooves. As you can see, I'm using the fence to help line up everything and keep it straight. Then obviously it takes a little longer than this normally because I have it on fast forward. And then we're cutting at an angle to try to get all of our insets set correctly, and I have to kind of go at curves to get them everything to fit. Next, I am using the bandsaw to cut all of our tree sides. I tend to go at angles first and then take the long sides to kind of get a nice clean straight lines. After a while, you kind of develop your own process for what you find is best and easiest to go through and make all of your cuts. Everybody has their own style. It's just a matter of practice to find out which style works for best for you. We now have trees that fit together. Next up is snow. Again, this is definitely fast forward. This is way slower than it looks. I went through and cut all the little exterior pieces and tried to take my time to go through and cut all the insides. With the bandsaw, you have a wider radius. With the scroll saw, you have a lot tighter radius you can make, as you can see as I'm making my tight curves. A nice thing about a scroll saw is if you back up with a regular blade, there is no teeth, so you can make those tight curves without worrying about creating more grooves. We are almost done with our snowflake. Now we have a snowflake.
So we now have all of our stuff cut. I kind of fast forwarded through and just did the reindeer, but we have our tree that we did initially. And I had to adjust a little bit and make a call on how much to add for this, but we have trees. We have our snow. And here is a scroll saw. Some use a scroll saw for this. And I will tend to mix up the bandsaw and the scroll saw, like do the big straight cuts, for example, with the bandsaw, then do like the more intricate inner cuts with the scroll saw. And then we have our reindeer. Because as we all know, they're better than people. So I'll go ahead and I'll show you how easy it is now to get this off. It just peels right off. And now we don't have any residue on our deer. And then for sanding, I'm going to go ahead and use a 180 grit and then a 220 grit. And then I will some for the intricate cuts. I have other small sanders over here and little standing twigs and different things I could use if I need to get into more of the intricate shapes on the interior. These I got on Amazon, or they're called sanding twigs. They come in a whole bunch of different grits. This is 100, which I didn't put on the package, so I had to go back and figure it and just wrote it with the Sharpie. but it's good for getting into these like fine little crevices and stuff that are harder to get to with a bigger sander. So these are great for little spaces. And then we have safety again. The hearing isn't too bad for this, but I do go ahead and put on my desk mask, safety glasses, and hearing just because it's better safe than to be sorry. So we'll go ahead and get all these sanded. We now have our holiday wood decor cut and sanded. So we have our tree, our reindeer, and our little snow. Have to remember to look at it backwards for me. So now is the fun part. This is definitely where, especially if you have little kids, you can start to get them involved, is that once you got the figurines cut out, is you can have them help paint. They could create their own design, customize, put word shapes, whatever you want. I do quite a few craft shows, so I try to stick to a little more traditional colors because it tends to be what fits best in most people's houses. But I will do, like for a snow, more of a matte or a satin finish, and then I'll do more of a metallic finish. Anything to add a little bit of extra pizzazz. And I like to use parchment paper to paint on because then your stuff doesn't stick to it. And you can tell you're a crafter when you're at Costco and they have these 2 packs on sale for cheaper than go to Amazon. Yeah, maybe bought 2 of them. You're definitely a crafter. By the way, we'll test to see how well I like the Costco parchment paper because I really hate the Dollar Tree parchment paper. That's probably the worst. So this does feel pretty good. So it's a first attempt at using Costco parchment paper. So we'll go ahead and get started with the painting. I will say that by far the hardest thing to paint from my prior experiences of having cut many a snowflake, because snows are popular in the craft show circuit, are the freaking snowflakes. So I have my white paint. And I got like this is a metallic white we're going to be using. I got the Rust-Oleum metallics. You can buy smaller containers, but I go through quite a bit of paint because again, I make stuff for craft shows. So I got this at Menards probably last year and it goes actually pretty far. So I can paint on my white. And I do have my brushes, a little bit of water back here in a little brush holder. And my brushes I notice are having a bit of a rough life that we're probably getting close to needing new ones. But this is where you even need to get a smaller brush too to try to get into all these nooks and crannies to get it really fully painted. Now everybody has their own painting technique, their style, how thick do you want to have the wood see through, etc., etc. Decide how you want it. Another option for these is you could also stain them or spray paint them. But I won't go through this whole thing because it takes forever to paint a snowflake. But as you can see, the white metallic kind of just has that nice sheen to it. I'll just do the front for this video. I'll finish the rest later, because nobody wants to sit and watch me paint. Then what I like to do is to have a little bit of a contrasting color. So for my other letters, I've got a blue metallic. So you can buy metallic paints now, I discovered, in quart size, and you can get custom colors. Before, I was buying the little ones, and then I was going through so much paint, it was kind of annoying. So I live in the Midwest, so we have Menards. So I have quite a few, I'll be using 2 Menards colors today. So this is Mediterranean Night. And it's actually a little bit less than the Rust-Oleum. So it's still pretty economical. I think it's about 25-ish, 23 to 25 for a quart of metallic paint. Now, if you don't do a ton of this, I would not see, but if you're going to do more metallics, it's kind of nice. But I am just wetting my brush just to get a nice, thin, translucent coat. Half the fun of using wood is you can still see the wood grain. So I leave my grain and stuff on purpose. I try to leave any knots a little bit. Like I know how to use filler primer and cover everything up. But half the fun part of using wood is to show it's wood. So I just thought this was a really pretty blue. And it contrasted against the white well. Like I like the white and the blue together. And I've actually sold quite a few of these at craft fair season. Oops. Don't tip your thing over into the white would be a good idea too. Finish it up a little later. And here's the green I got from Menards. And I've been in these a lot this year, so. This one is kind of like a greeny, goldy color. And this one is totally topiary. And they have like a couple greens, blues, purples, pinks, different. So I'm going to do my trees in a metallic green. Now I have done a tree in the past with a star on top. And I have one without stars. I've left them plain. I've put a stencil on them. I've added decorations. You can do whatever you want to make your tree however you would like it to be for your family. And these are fun to do, especially if you have like a large group that they can get a bunch of different trees. You can make white trees, red trees, green trees. I've done like sets of 3 where you have small, big, little, where I've done like a white, a red, and an off-white, and a green. Whatever you want. And a lot of times I'll do multiples at once just because if I do one side or get the bottoms, then I can flip them over. But the nice thing about working with parchment paper is that if you paint the bottoms, they don't tend to stick too badly to the parchment paper. So if you paint the bottom instead of it standing up to dry, it does pretty well. How thick? Just I tend to try to stay also with the wood grain, and I do the same when I get to staining. Here's our green tree. So I'll get both of those done, and then I can flip, paint the back side. Then we'll be able to finish up with a green tree. Now for my snowman, I decided to, instead of sticking with like the traditional red or blue or whatever color snow is, I was going to make a red reindeer. And then I'm going to do a white snowflake. Okay, I am an engineer. I tend to be a little bit more traditional in my colors. It happens. So the other tip and trick I've learned over the years is how to get paint a little bit that's nicer and better than craft paint. Now I don't mind like the artist paint, I'm talking like the acrylics. So Menards, Lowe's, Home Depot, all of them offer paint samples. They're usually around $5 a piece for the 8 ounce, and occasionally you'll get one on the clearance rack. I've gotten a couple for like 50 cents or $1. It's always a super exciting day. This one I think is red pepper. Kind of a darker red. But the nice thing is you can pick out whatever color you want, and there's tons of options. You can color match colors to get, like if you're trying to match like a piece of bedding or a fabric or something for a kid's craft room, you can go in and get them to color match, which is great depending on your art project. And I prefer the Menards Pittsburgh or the Home Depot Bear because this is interior exterior satin, and you can also get the exterior paint for Menards. I wish you could get matte, but unfortunately currently they're just satin. But these are also a great way to get paint, the exact color you want, and exterior paint. Since I do a lot of porch boards and exterior stuff for my craft shows, being able to get my exterior paint's a big deal. I will be honest though, I'm pretty sure that people hate me when they see me coming because they know I'm going to probably have 5 or 6 samples that they have to mix the little containers up. But they're used to it. They always ask me what I'm working on. And I like about these house paints, versus say a craft paint, is you get that nice paint and primer all in one. So you get a nice even coat. So now we have our deer. And I will go ahead and finish painting all these because nobody's that excited to watch me paint for a while. And then when we come back, we will talk about getting the stencil on our deer with the snowflake and then show what our final product is. So now it's time to have fun painting, get creative, and see what you can come up with. I have completed all the painting and we've got our coat of the blue and white on our snow. And I noticed last time I had the end backwards, now it is correct for you to see. And some other alternatives are maybe add some dots to this, mix it up, do whatever you feel like. But I think it's a super cute little decoration. I've even made them bigger sets and smaller sets and different words like Noel and Joy. Another alternative, if you don't want to go through the work it takes to cut this out, is you could make just a star or a octagon, hexagon, or whatever shape and just paint your snowflake on to kind of give the same impact, but just a little less cutting, particularly if you don't have a scroll saw. That'd be a lot harder to cut on just the bandsaw. We got our tree. Another alternative, add some ornaments, a graphic, a stencil, whatever you'd like to kind of spice it up a little bit. I thought about maybe adding some silver and gold ornaments, and then the song Silver and Gold went through my head. Good old-fashioned classic Christmas, so. Our final step is our reindeer. I did go through and give them a little light sanding to make them a bit more rustic looking, and I left out the damp cloth to remind you after dusting, I did go ahead and slightly dampen a paper towel or cloth to kind of get any of that excess dust off. Next up is our stencil. I went ahead and already transferred this to transfer tape. That's the easiest way to get a stencil, and I have some here that has a grid on it, which makes it a lot easier to apply. I had gone through, as you can see, and since I cut the shape of my deer out, I can simply place this on, lining up where all the grooves are, like so. See, now it lines up with my deer. Put my stencil on and really rub it down good. Peel off the transfer tape. I cut these, maybe even use like I have, like this kind of a thing to make sure that my stencil's down really good. Now this stencil vinyl does a pretty good job as far as not bleeding, but if you're really worried about bleeding and you want a cleaner look, there's a couple options. One, you could take the existing red paint and do a light coat over it, or you could use like a Mod Podge. We'll just use a little of the satin Mod Podge and very lightly go over the stencil. Basically what this is doing is it's taking any potential areas that would have bled and it's making the clear or the same color paint go through where it would have had any bleeding, and then when you go over it with your color, it's a lot crisper, cleaner lines. And I do a very light coat because I don't want it to be thick. Then I have just plain white paint. And I tend to buy my paint in exterior just because that way I don't have to buy multiples. Then I'm just going to very gingerly, you can either dot it or just kind of go over it. And I tend to kind of go light. As you can see. We will take off our stencil. Sometimes like a weeding tool works really well to help you get off the remainder of your stencil. And I always try to come in from behind, that way I don't get too much paint on everything. You can let it dry a little faster than I just did, but for the sake of time for our video, I went ahead and did it right away. Okay, we'll grab some tweezers. The ones I want. You can't tell, but I have a little Lazy Susan with all of my supplies right out of this shot, which is super handy, keeping everything, unless you drop your tools. It's probably the most monotonous part of any of these projects is like the little detail work, like the weeding or the peeling off the stencil. But I already know my abilities to paint this fine of a snowflake would be lacking. So where you know your skills aren't quite as strong as somebody else's, you improvise. So we have finished up the weeding. Now we have a finished snowman with a snowflake on it. I have done these in white, red, green, all sorts of different colors. I have also done a plain deer where I just tied a little bit of burlap and a small bow around his neck, and you can do whatever you want. Add a face, polka dot stripes, particularly the stencil. Like now you know how to do the simple stencil. It's kind of endless what your possibilities are, how you can kind of spice up your reindeer. I hope you've enjoyed. If you want to, please share whatever your creations are in the show notes. I will put a link to a private Facebook group I created so everybody can share what they made, what they've created, and how they have taken their own take on this project and what they came up with. If you like this video, please comment, subscribe, and thank you for joining me, and keep on creating.